I'm the technical director at Theater Lawrence, and due to current circumstances, there isn't much to technically direct. So instead, let's talk a bit about some parts of the theater that the average theater goer may not know much about or consider. For this first episode, let's talk a bit about scene design. This is the artistic craft of deciding what the stage looks like during a show. And I've learned recently that many people don't really know how that whole thing comes about. I've talked to people who are under the impression that we get the design along with the script, and that's nope. That's a lot of nope. That isn't to say that there's no help in determining the design. We have the script and it's full of hints about sort of what direction we should go in. The amount that a script prescribes the requirements for a set varies wildly from show to show. It's very much a spectrum from totally on your own freedom to like a laundry list of requirements that the show needs to even be possible. Some shows are straight up like, hey, do what you want. And others are, look, this show can't happen unless there's like 2 benches, 3 windows, a fireplace, like 5 closet doors, like who knows. But most shows are going to fall somewhere in the middle between those 2 extremes. For example, the musical Camelot. It tells us lots of things like it happens in the throne room or in a bedchamber. And that's what we know. But what's the bedchamber look like? Who knows? What's in that room? How big's the bed? Is there windows? Script doesn't care. That room's anything we want it to be as long as the audience understands that it's a bedchamber and whatever it is fits with the show. All that's on the designer. But on the extreme other end of the spectrum, let's look at noises off. If you're doing that show, you better have 8 doors. You can't do the show with any less. Gotta be 8. And the arrangement of those doors? Yeah, that's pretty well laid out for you by the script as well. And you gotta have a window that an actor can enter. And a second floor. And the whole thing's gotta rotate. Like, it's gotta be on a turntable. So as a designer, I mean, you can choose what the wallpaper looks like and what kind of couch is in the room. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but also not really. I mean, it's really prescribed for you. This is how Noises Off has to work. So once we've figured out how much freedom our design actually has, what comes next? Well, the first job is to read the script and find all of those requirements and get familiar with the script. I mean, real familiar. I mean, read that script over and over again until you don't want to look at it again. Then read it like 12 more times. Like sleep on that script as your pillow. Say good morning to it when you wake up. Like, you have to know that script so much. So during the copious amount of read-throughs, what are you actually looking for? The first is just sort of basic structure, like what is essential? What can the show not be performed without? For example, you're doing a production of Annie, you're gonna have some problems with page 1. You don't have any orphan beds, since that's all that's happening in page 1 is orphans in bed talking to each other. So you add that to the list. Probably gonna need a mansion for Warbucks too, right? Add that to the list. So once that list of requirements exists, then you gotta get practical. What actually fits on your stage? What actually fits in your budget? Like in that Camelot bedchamber, is it more practical to just have the bed? That's kind of the direction I went. But you better consult with your director about what else they might need. Maybe they need a bench in there. Maybe they need 2 chairs in there. Who knows? Also, don't forget that bed. That's got to get on stage somehow. And it's got to get back off stage. So then it's time to check the musical score. See how much time you actually have for that to happen. And then check what's leaving the stage when the bed's coming on. And what's coming onto the stage when the bed's going off. This is all just the logistical phase. Sorting out all the practical things. And that's especially true for our stage. At Theater Lawrence, we have a thrust stage, so we have audience on 3 sides instead of just 1, like a typical proscenium theater. Most scripts are written for proscenium, so many of the scripts' prescribed expectations, many of its assumptions don't carry over into our space. And we have to adapt quite a bit. So let's look a little closer at that idea. Lend Me a Tenor, another very prescribed set. You'll see this a lot in farces, right? You have to have 2 rooms. They have to have a door connecting them. Each room has to have another door that exits into the same hallway. Cool. Sounds pretty easy. But wait, I can't put a wall between the rooms. If I put a wall between the rooms, each audience bank on each side can't see the opposite room. The same goes for the door. You can't have a door in the middle of the stage just stand there. You can't see through the door. So my options for that door, stand in the middle of the stage, that's pretty limited. It's got to be as far away from the audience as possible. What we call upstage. As to avoid blocking, I guess, the actors from the audience's view, what we call sightlines. It's kind of important that the audience can see the actors, right? That's what they're paying for. So we kind of had to adapt a little bit of the show to our specific space. And I could talk at length about how putting that door that far upstage caused some cascading problems throughout the blocking and the rest of the set design that the director had to solve. So let's say that you've successfully navigated the logistical phase. You've sorted out all the required elements, figured out some basic ways that they can function on your specific stage, added the extra bits you need to give actors reasons to move about the stage, like motivated blocking. You gotta help your director, giving them like good paths to move through, places for actors to sit, things to interact with, so that they don't just stand in the same place the whole time. But now we gotta figure out what it actually looks like, what it feels like, what kind of space we're making, what are we trying to say with it, what themes are we reinforcing. At this point, we sort of have the problem of infinity. It could look like anything. And there's lots of methods in scene design for narrowing down that infinity. I personally prefer the idea of the scenic metaphor, which is like a guiding premise. It won't be obvious in the final product. It's not like a blatant metaphor, but it works like a fixed point to sort of circle around while you're sorting out the design. Since we've been returning to Camelot a lot throughout this, let's continue to use that as an example. It gave me the least amount of requirements to work with, so it needed a very grounding principle and goal. For me, it was the problem of scale, how small our stage is. A 30-foot by 30-foot stage with a 20-foot ceiling. And Camelot is this huge story with huge characters and huge emotions, and how do I put that in this small room? Well, I decided to make an actual fixed structure there. 2 huge columns with arches on the top, thin and tall, like cathedral architecture, right? It's designed to feel taller than it actually is. And I made them the maximum height of our space, like up to the ceiling basically. And I used them as a frame for every location. So then thin and tall sort of became the order of the day. It had to carry through all the other elements. So we made some rolling platforms to be the walls in the castle in various rooms, but they weren't walls, they were a few thin columns that towered over the actors. That aforementioned bedchamber, well yeah, let's have a 12-foot tall headboard, why not? Everything becomes grand via scale. Matilda, very different show than Camelot, and for that, the guiding principle that I chose was sort of her imagination. Everything was out of proportion, it was brightly colored, it was slightly askew, and the places where her imagination had more freedom to function and grow and act were brighter and more skewed and more interesting. At one end of the spectrum, the very conventional classroom where she was the most restricted, and that just had basic desks. And then there's the library where she was completely free, and we didn't make a library, we made a giant book that she could climb around on and use as a stage for telling her stories. According to the script, we just needed a classroom, we needed a library, but beyond that, we could kind of let the design run wild. This is, of course, super simplified. The full process involves many meetings, a lot of collaboration with the director and discussing their vision of the show and their needs for different scenes, and solving lots of mundane problems like, I don't know, what actually fits backstage, how many crew do we need to move what pieces, how fast. But in general, that's kind of the approach to the process, streamlined for you in about 10 minutes. So keep watching, and I'll do a couple more of these if you want to find out more stuff, or at least my opinion on some stuff. None of this is set in stone. Theater's very flexible and kind of do what works. So thanks, everybody. Bye.